The world 2 million years ago was not a home but a battleground. The sun rose over an untamed wilderness, its warmth quickly chased away by cold winds that swept across vast plains of dry grass and scattered acacia trees. Herds of antelope grazed under the wary gaze of predators. Saber-toothed cats crouched low in the grass, their eyes glinting like polished amber. The night belonged to creatures whose growls and screams pierced the darkness, a constant reminder that safety was a luxury unknown to early humans. Among this raw and violent world moved a small band of Homo habilis, their frail figures dwarfed by the predators they avoided. They were not hunters, they were scavengers, opportunists clinging to life with sharp instincts and simple tools. Their limbs were nimble, their hands capable of shaping rough stones into cutting edges. These crude tools were their lifeline, allowing them to strip flesh from abandoned carcasses before lions or hyenas returned to claim their kill. They had no words, only guttural cries and gestures that carried meaning. Danger, hunger, safety. Fire was a mystery they could not yet command, and the night pressed in on them like a living thing, driving them to huddle together under trees or inside shallow caves. Hunger gnawed at them constantly. The sight of insects crawling beneath bark or the smell of rotting meat on a distant breeze was enough to send them running. Their world was one of constant vigilance, where every rustle in the grass could mean death. One female, her ribs sharp beneath a thin layer of muscle, clutched a stick she had sharpened on a stone. She knelt near a termite mound, her dark eyes fixed on the shifting soil. With a sudden thrust she plunged the stick inside and withdrew it, now crawling with pale wriggling termites. She licked them off, savoring the burst of protein. Others in the group followed suit, their faces lit with faint triumph. This was ingenuity in its earliest form, a spark of problem-solving that would one day lead to spears, cities, and rockets piercing the sky. Life was harsh, but these creatures were not helpless. They were learning. Each day was a test, and each test etched lessons into their bones. They watched vultures circle overhead and followed them to carcasses. They studied how predators moved, where they rested, when they hunted. They learned to smash bones with stones to reach the marrow, a rich, hidden food source. With every act of survival, their brains grew sharper, their hands more skilled. Yet danger was always near. One evening, as the setting sun painted the sky blood-red, their group stumbled upon another band of Homo habilis. The air crackled with tension. These were not strangers, they were rivals. The two groups froze, their knuckles white on their stone tools. A low snarl from one male broke the silence. They were too alike to trust, too desperate to share. A thrown rock scattered them, both groups retreating into the tall grass, hearts pounding. Even among their own kind, danger lurked. Cooperation was fleeting, a fragile truce easily shattered by hunger. Rainstorms turned the earth to mud and lightning split the sky, illuminating faces smeared with dirt and fear. They had no shelter but trees and caves, and sickness often followed the wet and cold. Death was constant, an infant's silent body buried beneath stones, a young male dragged away by a leopard, a female limping from a festering wound. Yet life clung stubbornly. They moved forward, driven by an instinct older than thought. Survive. Generations passed in this rhythm of fear and hunger, yet something remarkable was happening. Slowly, painfully, these small beings were changing. Their hands learned precision, their eyes sought patterns. The spark of intelligence was kindled by necessity. A sharpened rock became a cutting tool, a stick became a spear. Scavengers began to hunt, however timidly. They discovered that together they could drive away predators, that a dozen stones hurled in unison could send even a lion retreating. The first fire they saw was not their own. It came from a storm, a tree struck by lightning, flames roaring into the night. They approached it cautiously, their faces glowing with reflected light, their eyes wide with awe and fear. Some dared to snatch burning branches, carrying them clumsily back to their shelters. Fire became warmth, protection, and hope, a turning point in their long struggle for survival. This was the dawn of humanity, though they were not yet fully human. Every scar, every near-death escape, every clever solution carved the blueprint of future generations. The fight for life was unending, but in that struggle something extraordinary was forged. From trembling scavengers came a species that would shape the world. As the flames crackled in the dark, warding off unseen predators, a few huddled figures sat close, their breath fogging in the night air. For the first time they were not entirely helpless. The darkness still pressed around them, but now they held a fragment of the sun in their hands. The age of shadows was ending, and the first glimmers of civilization were centuries away, but the path had begun. The world was changing. The glaciers of the Ice Age began to retreat, leaving behind fertile valleys and winding rivers that carved through the land like silver threads. Forests thickened, grasslands spread, and animals roamed in abundance. For countless generations, humanity had been a wandering species, following herds and seasons, clinging to survival. But now something began to shift. not overnight, not in a single generation, but over thousands of years, as slow and steady as water carving stone. A small group of early humans, descendants of those who once scavenged termite mounds and huddled in caves, stood on the edge of a riverbank. They were taller now, stronger, and their skulls housed larger, sharper brains. These were Homo sapiens, hunters and gatherers who had inherited the ingenuity of their ancestors. Their hands gripped finely shaped flint tools, and slung across their backs were spears tipped with stone and bone. They had mastered fire, language, and cooperation. But their lives were still harsh. Food was never guaranteed, winter could be merciless, the birth of a child was as much a gamble as a blessing, one failed hunt, one drought could bring starvation. It was in this world of uncertainty that a revolution was born, not with a weapon or a conquest, but with a seed. Somewhere, perhaps in the Fertile Crescent where rivers overflowed each spring, a woman noticed something curious. Seed she had discarded near their camp had sprouted. Stalks of grain swayed in the wind where none had grown before. She began to gather seeds carefully, storing them in clay pots instead of scattering them. Soon others followed her lead, planting small plots near their shelters. Hunting remained vital, but for the first time humans could grow their own food. This simple act, the planting of seeds, changed everything. Seasons began to guide their movements. Instead of endlessly roaming, they stayed longer in fertile areas, guarding their crops from animals. Slowly their camps became permanent. They built sturdier shelters from mud and reeds, dug pits to store grain, and domesticated animals that once roamed free. Dogs helped hunt and guard their homes. Sheep and goats provided milk, meat, and hides. Humanity was weaving itself into the land, creating a new rhythm of life. Yet this shift was not without cost. Farming was grueling, repetitive work. Calloused hands planted and harvested under scorching suns and backs bent from dawn till dusk. Unlike hunting, which brought bursts of feast or famine, agriculture required constant labor. People began to settle close together, and where people gathered, problems grew. The first villages emerged, clusters of mud huts with smoke curling from small fires. Children played in the dirt while adults tended fields or shaped clay into pots. But crowded living came with unseen dangers. Waste collected in the streets, attracting rats and insects. Water sources became tainted. Disease began to spread in ways nomadic life had never allowed. Still, the advantages outweighed the dangers. Food surpluses meant more mouths could be fed. Populations grew. Specialization emerged. Some became potters, others toolmakers, others storytellers or spiritual leaders. Trade flourished. Ideas spread faster. For the first time in history, humans were not merely surviving day by day, they were shaping their environment, bending nature to their will. With villages came walls, and with walls came the idea of us and them. Land once freely roamed became territory to defend. Conflict sharpened weapons and hardened hearts. The first organized violence erupted, raids on neighboring villages, skirmishes over water and farmland. Blood stained the soil that had once seemed abundant. Yet alongside conflict grew beauty. The walls of clay homes bore simple carvings, the first whispers of art. Music echoed through early settlements, a rhythm of drums and bone flutes. Spirituality blossomed. People looked to the stars and saw gods, weaving stories to explain the mysteries around them. Burial rituals became more elaborate, a sign of respect for the dead and a belief in something beyond life. The agricultural revolution was the foundation of everything to come. Humanity had traded the freedom of the wild for the stability of settlement. They had created homes, villages, and the first sense of belonging to a place rather than merely passing through. But in this trade, they also inherited a new set of chains: disease, social hierarchy, and the ceaseless toil of farming. As centuries passed, these villages grew larger, merging into towns. Clay gave way to stone, huts to houses, and stories passed down by firelight became traditions etched into memory. Humanity had begun its slow climb toward civilization, but even in these early days, danger was never far. A mother tucked her child into a woven mat inside a small clay house, while just beyond their walls, wolves howled at the moon. Inside, firelight flickered and grain sat stored in clay jars. The village was small, fragile, and vulnerable, but it was also a miracle. For the first time in human history, people had built something that could outlast them. The age of wandering was ending. The age of civilization had begun. The small, fragile villages that once clung to riverbanks swelled into towns, and those towns grew into cities. What began as scattered clusters of huts became bustling centers of power, trade, and ambition. Humanity had entered a new era, the age of cities and empires, where stone walls rose high and bronze gleamed in the hands of warriors. The rivers that once served as lifelines for farming now carried boats heavy with goods, pottery, grain, spices, and textiles. Merchants haggled in crowded marketplaces where the smell of fish mingled with the aroma of fresh bread. Streets were alive with voices speaking dozens of dialects, traders from distant lands bringing stories of mountains and deserts beyond the horizon. Yet beneath this vibrant life lurked filth and danger. Early cities were cramped, noisy, and chaotic. Houses were built close together, streets narrow and twisting with no proper drainage. Waste was tossed into alleys, contaminating water supplies. Rats scurried through refuse, fleas carrying diseases that would someday devastate entire populations. Life expectancy in the cities was brutally short, but still people flocked to them, drawn by the promise of trade, security, and opportunity. The birth of metallurgy marked another turning point. Bronze tools and weapons replaced brittle stone, transforming agriculture, warfare, and craftsmanship. Blacksmiths became highly valued, their forges glowing in the heart of cities, while warriors armed with bronze swords stood guard on towering stone walls. For the first time, humanity could shape metal to its will, and with that power came empires. Kings and rulers emerged, seated on thrones in grand palaces decorated with intricate carvings. They claimed divine favor, their authority reinforced by armies and towering monuments. Vast cities like Uruk, Babylon, and Thebes became the centers of civilization, their ziggurats and temples piercing the sky. Writing systems developed carved into clay tablets, recording trade deals, royal decrees, and myths that would outlast their creators. But the splendor of these cities was built on the backs of the poor. Farmers worked the fields from dawn to dusk, their grain taxed heavily to feed the city's elite. Slaves and prisoners of war hauled stones for palaces and monuments, often dying in the process. Disease swept through the crowded streets, and famine was a constant threat. For all its progress, urban life was unforgiving. Still, humanity's hunger for advancement never waned. Knowledge flourished in temples and schools where scribes studied mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. Priests charted the stars, seeking omens and patterns in the heavens. Builders developed new architectural techniques, raising aqueducts and irrigation systems that transformed dry landscapes into fertile farmland. With wealth and power came ambition. Wars erupted over territory, resources, and trade routes. Armies marched across plains and deserts, cities were burned, and entire civilizations rose and fell in cycles of conquest and collapse. Violence became more organized than ever before. Chariots thundered across battlefields, shields clashed, and bronze swords flashed in the sun. Yet even in these turbulent times, humanity created wonders. Stone temples stood for centuries, libraries preserved knowledge, and epic tales like Gilgamesh were carved into clay, ensuring that even long-dead kings would be remembered. Humanity was no longer just surviving, it was leaving a legacy. In a bustling marketplace, a mother led her child past stalls stacked high with grain, fish, and exotic spices. The air buzzed with life. Merchants shouting prices, donkeys braying, metalworkers hammering in nearby forges. Yet just around the corner, a man lay sick in the gutter, fevered and ignored. The city was a place of contrasts, wealth and poverty, learning and ignorance, safety within walls but danger in every shadow. The first laws emerged to impose order on this chaos. Stone tablets etched with rules proclaimed justice, fairness, and punishment. Crime was met with swift retribution, yet corruption thrived among the powerful. Humanity had built cities, but those cities reflected their makers, flawed, ambitious, and restless. As centuries turned to millennia, bronze gave way to iron, empires expanded, and civilizations flourished, fell, and rose again. Great roads connected distant lands, ships sailed across open seas, and the dream of exploration began to stir. Humanity's reach grew wider, but so did its appetite for conquest. In the flicker of torchlight, a scribe pressed a reed stylus into wet clay, recording the king's latest decree. Outside, the city hummed with life. Farmers unloading grain, soldiers sharpening blades, traders arguing over silver. This was no longer a world of wandering tribes. This was the world humanity had built, organized, powerful, and perilous. The leap from caves to cities had been astonishing, but the price was high. Disease, inequality, and war had become permanent shadows of civilization. Humanity was no longer at the mercy of nature alone. Now it had become its own greatest threat. And yet the spark of innovation continued to burn. Great voyages lay ahead, along with revolutions that would reshape society. For now, the ancient cities stood as testaments to what humanity could achieve, and reminders of how fragile that achievement was. The march of time quickened. Centuries passed like the flick of a candle flame. The cities of stone and bronze gave way to bustling metropolises of brick, iron, and steel. Empires rose and crumbled, but humanity's hunger for progress only deepened. Roads became railways, caravans became steamships, and the sound of blacksmiths' hammers was drowned out by the thunder of machines. The Industrial Revolution swept across the world like wildfire. Once quiet villages transformed into sprawling industrial towns, their skies blackened by smoke. Chimneys pierced the clouds, factories roared day and night, and rivers ran dark with chemical waste. The rhythm of life was no longer set by the sun or the seasons, but by factory whistles and mechanical gears. Inside those factories, men, women, and even children toiled endlessly. The promise of steady wages came at a terrible price. Long hours, dangerous machinery, and lungs choked with soot. Workers lived crammed together in filthy tenements where disease thrived, echoing the overcrowded cities of ancient times but on a much larger scale. The world was richer than ever before, but that wealth was built on exhaustion and suffering. Yet innovation flourished. The printing press spread knowledge, railways shrank continents, and electricity illuminated the darkness. Steamships crossed oceans in weeks instead of months, and telegraphs sent words across continents at the speed of lightning. Humanity's dreams had outgrown its villages. It was now shaping the entire planet. With this power came conflict on a scale the world had never seen. Nations armed themselves with weapons forged by the same industrial might that powered their factories. In the early 20th century, war erupted, swallowing entire continents. World War I was a nightmare of mud, gas, and gunfire. Soldiers crouched in endless trenches surrounded by rats and the stench of death, as machine guns and artillery turned battlefields into slaughterhouses. The war ended, but peace was fleeting. Barely 2 decades later, humanity plunged into World War II, a conflict so vast and devastating that cities burned under relentless bombing, and entire populations faced annihilation. The world had harnessed the power of science not only to heal and build but also to destroy on an unimaginable scale. When the first atomic bombs fell, humanity stood on the edge of a precipice it had never faced before, the ability to wipe itself out completely. And yet, humanity endured. The smoke of war cleared, and a new era dawned. Skyscrapers reached higher than ancient pyramids, highways stretched like veins across continents, and airplanes stitched the world together in hours. The same ingenuity that had once sharpened sticks to hunt termites now sent satellites into orbit and men to the moon. But for all this progress, humanity remained deeply connected to its ancient roots. The instincts forged over millions of years, fear, hunger, vigilance, still lived inside modern bodies. Even in a world of supermarkets overflowing with food, those primal urges whispered, "Store more, take more, stay alert." Anxiety, once a survival mechanism, became a daily struggle. The modern city glows with neon lights humming with energy. Inside air-conditioned homes, people scroll through glowing screens, connected to billions yet isolated from those around them. We are safer than our ancestors could ever imagine, free from predators, sheltered from storms, with medicine that can cure diseases that once killed entire villages. Yet our hearts still race at unexpected noises, our minds still brace for danger that rarely comes. We live longer, eat better, and wield technology that can reshape the earth. But beneath the surface we are still the same creatures who once huddled in caves, clutching fire against the darkness. A child today walks through the aisles of a supermarket, her small hands reaching for brightly colored packages. She doesn't know hunger as her ancestors did, yet deep in her brain the echoes remain. The fear of famine, the drive to hoard food, the instinct to seek safety. The ancient survival code still runs within her, invisible but unbroken. Our species has journeyed from scavengers on the African plains to builders of cities that glitter like constellations at night. We have crossed oceans, conquered disease, split the atom, and touched the stars, but every step forward carries the memory of what came before. The fight-or-flight instincts that once saved us from lions now fuel anxiety in a world where true danger is rare. The hunger that drove us to survive scarcity now tempts us to excess. The same brain that sharpened stones for hunting now designs artificial intelligence and spacecraft. This is the paradox of humanity. We are creatures of both survival and imagination, shaped by struggle yet capable of beauty and innovation. Our ancestors' fear has become our caution, their courage our resilience, their curiosity our ambition. Tonight, in a quiet apartment overlooking a city of lights, a person closes their laptop and looks out the window. Far below, cars move like rivers of fire. Far above, satellites blink like artificial stars. We are no longer prey, no longer bound by the wild, but the ancient shadows still whisper to us. From the first spark of fire in a cave to the glowing screens in our hands, humanity's story is one of survival, adaptation, and relentless progress. The world has changed beyond recognition, but in our hearts we are still the same, descendants of those who dared to survive.